Good evening. There are now 6 days until the general strike against Congress. Congress has the ability to act, the ability to solve many, many problems that America is facing, and yet they are refusing to do so. And so the way that we can force them to act is by unionizing as swing voters, by coming together behind one set of demands. That is the blueprint for a better America. Our crowdsourced legislative package that will end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars. By offering this one set of demands to the candidates for Congress in all 470 congressional races, we can change the national conversation around solutions. Let the American people see that we have the ability. There are lots of smart people in this country who can do better than the 535 members in Congress. And the way that we can do that is by getting back to our constitutional duties. What are our responsibilities as Americans? What are we supposed to be doing? And the framers, they laid them out for us in the preamble to the Constitution. So I'm going to recite the preamble and start the meeting off with that reminder. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Now, our legislative package is based on those 5 duties, and we've already covered Title I, establish justice, Title II, ensure domestic tranquility, Title III, provide for the common defense, and tonight we're going to continue with Title IV, promoting the general welfare. Now, welfare has a very specific meaning. It means health, happiness, prosperity. How do we promote prosperity? And the answer is what part of the answer is universal basic income. To stimulate the economy, not by adding money at the top of the economic ladder and hoping that it trickles down, but instead adding it at the bottom and watching it trickle up, sort of a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. And so we need a new framework for the way the economy works. This is the 21st century. It's time to upgrade our system. And so I'm going to get into the first section here, section, what are we on, 431. All right. Section 431 is the findings and purpose. The Congress finds the following. 1. After the Revolutionary War, the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, established the first Bank of the United States. By consolidating debt and expanding the money supply, Hamilton was able to grow the economy by influencing the circulation of money through bank branches up and down the East Coast. However, since sending letters was the fastest form of communication available to him, he was limited in how well he could manage the economy. 2. 4 generations later, during the Civil War, the U.S. Treasury introduced greenbacks as legal tender. This sovereign money was introduced directly under Congress's constitutional authority and created the first national currency. Abraham Lincoln also signed the National Banking Acts, regulating the banking system as well as could be done when the telegraph was the fastest form of communication. 3. 4 generations later, during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt decoupled the money supply from the gold standard and addressed wealth inequality through government spending. He also signed the Banking Act in 1933, increasing oversight of the banking system now that the telephone was the fastest form of communication. 4. In the 21st century, modern technology allows for instantaneous communication around the globe, enabling real-time payment processing. Accordingly, economist Robert Hockett has proposed the Treasury Dollar Act of 2020, upgrading the national banking system again to create a public payment infrastructure equally and efficiently accessible to all. 5. As previous cycles have demonstrated, it is necessary to increase the money supply in the long run to maintain stable prices and maximize growth. Now, this dividend is the result of the evolution and the growth of the U.S. economy, and Congress finds that the system-wide profit from the economy should be distributed among its owners, the citizens of the United States. Accordingly, the money supply should be expanded to include a digital legal tender known as Treasury dollar bills issued by the U.S. Treasury. 6. The Treasury already possesses the framework of a public payment infrastructure through their Treasury Direct accounts, which allow account holders to conduct transactions at any time of the day or night and can be expanded to accommodate wider use by the American people. The purpose of this subtitle is to promote economic prosperity in the United States while establishing the U.S. as a worldwide leader in digital currency. So tonight we're going to talk more about monetary theory and what is money? Money is a medium of exchange. It's used to facilitate transfers, to buy, sell goods and services in the United States or anywhere. It's not intended to be a store of value. That's what assets are for. Money is a medium of exchange. And so Congress has delegated its constitutional authority to create money to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, by law, is supposed their duties are, quote, to maintain the long-run growth of the monetary and credit aggregates commensurate with the economy's long-run potential to increase production, and so to promote effectively the goals of maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. So their goal is to grow the amount of money in the system as in line with the growth of the economy, to moderate long-term interest rates, provide stable prices, and maximum employment. This is the Federal Reserve's mandate. Unfortunately, we have, over the last 40 years, there's been a structural gap in our economy where, I don't know the chart, maybe you've seen this chart of the growth of wages and the growth of productivity. And back in the 1970s, back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, they rose together. Wages went up, productivity went up together. And in the 1970s, they decoupled. Productivity continued to still go up. However, wages grew at a slower rate. And so this created a structural gap in the economy where the wages paid to the working class were not enough to buy the goods and services that were in the economy, the goods and services that were being produced, the goods and services that were for sale. And so what happened? How do we make that up? Well, in his book, Basic Income and Sovereign Money, Jeff Crocker, he lays it out this way. He says that in high technology economies, productivity means the wage component of output reduces. Earned income becomes insufficient to purchase the productive output of the economy or to meet consumers' expenditures. This requires increased unearned income in the form of pensions, welfare benefits, dividends, and consumer credits. Increased welfare benefits push government spending in a deficit and increase the national debt to levels which can never be repaid. Increased consumer credit leads to unsustainable household debt, which cannot be repaid out of the same declining wage share. This leads to default, the meltdown of the financial sector built on this debt, and economic crisis. And then governments follow this austerity policy, mistakenly trying to reduce the deficit, but thereby increasing poverty and inequality. We need a different model, and the different model is Treasury dollar bills, new sovereign money, digital assets added to the economy as a way to address this structural gap that's created by the credit and the interest that destabilizes our economy. One of the, so Ross Perot was the first guy I ever voted for president back in the 90s. And, he was a billionaire. He seemed like a pretty credible guy. And he was running as an independent, and he used to do these prime time infomercials right to the American people, and he'd use these charts and graphs about the economy. And he was a pretty populist message. He talked about how our per capita healthcare spending was the highest on the planet. We were only 16th. We were 16th in life expectancy. Now, 30 years later, we're down to 40th. He had charts on the high rate of child poverty, one showing that our military spending was all out of proportion with other countries. He showed charts that condemned the ratio of CEO salaries to their employees. He pointed at it. He said, trickle down economics didn't trickle down, folks. It stopped right here. But his main point that he was running on was balancing the budget. He said that the national debt was unacceptable and unsustainable. It was $4 trillion, 3/4 racked up in 12 years under Ronald Reagan and George Bush. But if you go back and watch, there's this point that he makes that jumps out as obviously incorrect. He says, $4 trillion, folks, we got nothing to show for it. And you got to ask, really? Like, how could we have borrowed $4 trillion and had nothing to show for it? Like, was there a giant bonfire behind the White House where we roasted marshmallows and hot dogs over smoldering bundles of $100 bills? Did it get stashed under the mattress in the Lincoln bedroom? Like, of course, we had something to show for it. We had spent $4 trillion into the economy. That went to infrastructure, it went to healthcare, it went to employment for millions of people who then took their paychecks and spent them in other parts of the economy. And so this is the Ross-Perot fallacy, the idea that the budget should be balanced, that government should take in whatever it takes in taxes is all it should spend out. No, Congress has the authority and the duty and the responsibility to manage the economy, and that requires increasing the amount of money in circulation over time. And so that means spending more money than we take in. Now, the policy choice that has been made, though, as I said, is to borrow that money into existence, that Congress delegated that authority to the Federal Reserve and franchised it out to all the local banks. Yeah. But again, Ross-Perot, he had this folksy populist message. This fallacy was easy to gloss over because it sounded plausible. This idea, right? That's the way that family budgets work. And Americans had to live within their means, spend less than they earn, not run up huge credit card debts. And so surely the government had to have the same constraint. And Ross-Perot got people's attention because he was credible, but he was wrong. And he convinced millions and millions of people that we should balance the budget and that deficit spending was bad. And it got baked into our political consciousness. It became a shared cultural assumption, as unquestionable as driving on the right side of the road. Yeah, of course, that's just what we do. Nobody challenged him. Nobody questioned him. And so the Ross-Perot fallacy went right into Washington, and these ideas of balance the budget, pay as you go. Bill Clinton beat him for the presidency, and then he worked with Republicans to eliminate the deficit. I remember Clinton standing in front of the whiteboard, taking great pride in drawing this big circle, this big zero, demonstrating that the government was only spending as much as it took in that year. But when you step back, it doesn't make sense. The federal debt was last at zero in 1835, and President Andrew Jackson, he paid off the debt. But we had less than 15 million people in our country. Of course, we need more money in circulation. And that's the federal government's job to do it, to put it there through deficit spending. That's their constitutional responsibility. What we're not obligated to do is to borrow that money. Abraham Lincoln demonstrated this during the Civil War. The U.S. Treasury issued greenbacks, legal tender backed by the credit of the United States. Look, the national debt just hit $31 trillion, and it's not supposed to be paid back. We would wreck the economy if we sucked $31 trillion out of it. It's not supposed to be paid back. It is an excuse to pay out hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars every year to people who already have money and to give them free money as interest for the privilege of keeping that $30 trillion in circulation. That money could be, should be better spent in other parts of our economy. Money is the lifeblood of our economy, and its proper circulation is essential to well-being. Consider the human body, right? At birth, when a baby is born, the amount of blood that it has wouldn't even fill a soda can. And then by age 10, that child has about 2 liters of blood circulating through its veins. A healthy adult, I've got probably 1.5 gallons of blood. So while you can use metrics like body temperature to judge human health across a diverse population, there is no correct amount of blood for a human being. Any doctor who said that well-being required a fixed quantity of blood that shouldn't increase, they would be guilty of malpractice. Money is the lifeblood of our economy, and it needs to grow along with the economy. It's this growth in the system that should be distributed to all Americans. Andrew Yang called this universal basic income the freedom dividend. And so we established the American Union Jobs Program in the Blueprint for a Better America. And this is universal basic income. This is the way that we distribute these new dollars so that every American gets an equal share. So there's a bunch of overlap between what we're talking about tonight and then what we're going to talk about on Tuesday night, the American Union Jobs Program. I'll try and explain some of the relevant details as they come along. But all right, so that's sort of the monetary theory, and that's going to end what I have to say about section 431. And so now we'll start getting into the actual details. Again, this isn't a nebulous proposal. This isn't just some idea that we're throwing out there. Oh, we ought to do this. This is a very specific proposal on how we can upgrade our banking system, upgrade the monetary system, improve the general welfare by passing the Blueprint for a Better America and benefiting all Americans. All right, section 432 is definitions. I just like to, I want to credit some of the sources for the language in this whole subtitle. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, he proposed S 3571 at the start of the pandemic, the Banking for All Act. Parts of that are in this legislative package. Rashida Tlaib of Minnesota proposed HR 1030, the Automatic Boost to Communities Act. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand in New York proposed S 2755 in 2018, the Postal Banking Act. As I mentioned, Robert Hockett's the Treasury Dollar Bill Act of 2020. He also co-authored a book with Aaron James, Money from Nothing, and Jeff Crocker's book, Basic Income and Sovereign Money, all contributed to the details of tonight's subtitle. So the definitions are generally self-explanatory, and all right. So adult, there'll be digital treasury accounts for all adults, and this definition is in the American Union Jobs Program. It means somebody over 18 or an emancipated minor. Digital dollars means treasury dollar bill balances consisting of digital ledger entries recorded as assets by the U.S. Treasury. That is important. Joe Biden earlier this year issued an executive order on ensuring responsible development of digital assets and defined cryptocurrencies as a digital asset, which, okay, yes, those are digital assets. However, when he defined central bank digital currency, which is what treasury dollar bills are, he defined them as a form of digital money or monetary value denominated in the national unit of account that is a direct liability of the central bank. So he's trying to define digital dollars as being a liability, as being a debt, as being something owed, instead of, while at the same time recognizing that digital assets can be created. We can create digital assets directly. and not pay hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars a year for the privilege. The rest of these are kind of, we'll talk a little more about pass-through accounts later. Their unit of account is Federal Reserve notes. And what was the other one I want to get to? Okay, Treasury dollar bill. The term Treasury dollar bill means a zero interest Treasury bill with no expiration date valued at precisely one Federal Reserve note. So if you know anything about Bitcoin, you know that your value today may fluctuate very wildly over time, and you don't know what it's going to be worth tomorrow. Treasury dollar bills would be pegged 1-to-1 to the value of a Federal Reserve note, to the dollar. So digital dollars are worth just as much as paper dollars. That concludes section 432. Let's go on into section 433. Section 433 is we're going to establish digital treasury accounts. First, for the Treasury of the United States, there's one master account. This is, again, a central bank digital currency. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, the way it works is that every time there's a transaction, they write it down in the digital ledger, and then they make a billion, however many copies, and spread it around all over the place. Very inefficient, burns a whole lot of electricity. What is simpler, easier, more efficient is one ledger that writes down all the transactions and records all the transactions. And that's what a central bank can do. So the US Treasury, our central bank, under this system would have the American Value Fund, whose unit of account shall be Treasury dollar bills. And yeah, maybe we'll come back to this section. That you could the idea that you could trade Federal Reserve notes for Treasury dollar bills, if there are Treasury dollar bills to be existed, because this legislation is very specific in how they can be created. Can't just be general. Can't be printed in excess, only as dividends to the American people. But when they come back to the Treasury, they'd be stored here. All right. Secretary to open and maintain digital Treasury accounts. And there's 5 different types. So a B1 account is for adult American citizens. B1 account, the Secretary of the Treasury shall open them for every adult. Yeah, so B1 accounts are for every adult. B2 accounts is for any recipient who is not a citizen of the United States. And if their circumstances change, then their account gets terminated or gets qualified as a B5 account. B3 accounts are for all the Federal Reserve banks, so that they have master accounts to pool Treasury dollar bills for their member banks. B4 accounts are for government agencies. Anywhere that you pay taxes or pay fees or pay any money to the government, they will be set up to accept digital Treasury dollar bills. They will have an account to do that. So you can use your digital dollar bills to pay your taxes or anything else. And then 5 is just sort of the leftovers. The Secretary may open and maintain a digital Treasury account for a qualified person. And so a qualified person is defined as any lawful resident of the United States, legal entity conducting business in the United States, or any other person that the Secretary shall see fit to include. So if you're a business, you can open up a B5 account so that you can accept Treasury dollar bills as payment from your customers. All right, and this is part of the American Union Jobs Program. All right, So about these digital accounts, these are no restrictions on citizens. Citizens will not be able, you can't block access to a citizen's digital account for any reason, including but not limited to age, ancestry, arrest record, bankruptcy, criminal conviction, debt or other liability, gender, geographic location, income, marital status, occupation, race, religion, or sexual orientation. When we talk about things like digital currencies, like a central bank currency, people, there's some fear mongering. And one of the fears that's passed around is the idea that, well, the government will cut you off if you don't get a vaccine or whatever, if you for whatever reason. So written right into the legislation is to ensure that no, you cannot withhold these things from adults for any reason. Paragraph 3 here says that the post office, we're going to talk about postal banking here shortly, but post offices will have ATMs at all postal retail facilities, so that, again, you get your digital treasury account. Maybe if you don't want to use the digital dollars, then you go to the ATM. You can take out crisp $20 bills, spend them anonymously, however you want. There'll be one at every post office. These accounts shall include debit cards, online account access, toll-free telephone number access, automatic bill pay, mobile banking, customer service, and other services that the Secretary determines appropriate in the public interest. So all the things you expect from a regular bank account, only a free account with the U.S. Treasury. No account fees, minimum balances, or maximum balances. Reasonable protection against fraud. The ability to transfer Treasury dollar bills in real time without fees to other digital Treasury accounts. So again, you go into a local business that accepts these, that has their own Treasury account, you can transfer money for free. Right now, credit card fees add like 1 to 2% to the cost of everything that we buy. Credit card fees are banks skimming off the economy because people need to move money around digitally. And there's no reason why the U.S. Treasury can't do this, can't facilitate this for the American people, can't make us a leader in digital dollars and digital currencies. There's no reason why we can't develop a public payment infrastructure. Back in the 18th century or whatever, right? You'd have cash, and when you'd go and you'd pay in cash, that was it. There was no fees. There was no like, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to charge you 2% in order to accept your cash. No, you could just move money around for free as cash. But this is the 21st century. Our economy is based on moving money around the country, and the United States can set up a payment infrastructure to do it for free. That's what this paragraph does. Privacy protections for B1 accounts, adult American citizens, shall have the ability to anonymize transfers or delete their transaction history, and may not have account details, transaction history, or personally identified information shared without their consent, except as authorized by the subtitle or pursuant to a valid court order. So again, by writing good, clean legislation ourselves outside the swamp of Washington, D.C., we can ensure that as a 21st century economy is designed, that these sorts of privacy protections are built in at the very beginning. Paragraph 9, this is going to be built on the Treasury Direct infrastructure. And so we include the ability to buy or sell securities from the Treasury, so you can invest in America. These features would be developed with the U.S. Digital Service. They are an executive branch department that President Obama founded in 2014. And they have hundreds of employees working on improving and upgrading how the American people interact with government services. And they're the ones who can develop this interface for the US Treasury, so that every American can have a digital treasury account. All right. How long will this take? According to Robert Hockett, who again provided a lot of the framework for this model of treasury accounts, according to him, it should only take take a number. We can count this in a number of months. It'll take months to build these new accounts on top of the Treasury Direct program that already exists with the U.S. Treasury, where right now you can buy and sell U.S. Treasuries 24/7, anytime, night or day. So when exactly will this start? That's what subsection D does. The Secretary of the Treasury will announce an estimated launch date every month, keep the American people informed, and provide progress. And so the launch date shall be no later than 1 month after determining that these 4 conditions have been met. More than 300 million individual accounts have been opened pursuant to B1 and B2. The requirements of B3 and B4 have been met. Qualified people have the ability to request an account pursuant to B5, and in conjunction with U.S. Digital Service, the account features required by subsection C 4 through 9 have been developed. If you go back and look, that doesn't actually include the ATMs at the post offices as a condition for launching Treasury dollar bills and the American Union Jobs Program. So those are required, but not necessarily in this. Hopefully we can get the program up and running without necessarily waiting on those. All right, and okay. So what happens if you don't like this idea of a digital currency? As I've said, ATMs at the post office, you can withdraw your Treasury dollar bills as Federal Reserve notes, paper money, you can go spend anonymously, or you can just ignore it completely if you want. And so if you do, the money that is deposited into your digital treasury account will be applied as a tax credit. If the only thing that happens, you don't accept money with it, you don't do anything with it, and your universal basic income just piles up in there, then after 12 months, at the end of the year, the Treasury will declare your account declined. It will take out the money that is in there and notify the Internal Revenue Service, who will apply a refundable tax credit in the amount. So $15,600 a year is the starting UBI for adults. And so if your tax liability is less than $15,600 a year, then you will get back whatever the difference is. So that's what happens if you don't want to participate in a digital economy. Again, we listen to the concerns that people have in developing this legislative package, and some people don't want to participate, but there are millions and millions of people who are unbanked, who are outside of the banking system. And the best way to bring them into the banking system is by establishing a public payment infrastructure, ensuring that everyone has access for free without getting hit with all sorts of ridiculous bank fees, and creating a mechanism for distributing Treasury dollar bills to everyone. The rest of this section has some clerical amendments, some references, clarifying that you can use digital treasury accounts for electronic payments, that they are a legal tender, that they are an obligation of the United States. And that's what the rest of this section. Yeah, all right. Okay, I think that's it for 433. There are a couple of the other questions people have is, what about questions about fraud? There are no penalties in this legislation. If Congress wants to pass some, that they can, or leave that decision to them. Again, ending mass incarceration, when reducing the number of crimes on the books, and instead focusing on the solutions that we want to implement. That's sort of the driver for this legislative package. But as far as opening up B1 accounts, again, this is the Secretary of Treasury is charged with getting one to every individual American citizen. And yeah. And then if you're not a citizen or you're a business or whatever, opening one up under the Section B5. All right. So then the next question is, the next section is Section 434. This is the part where we actually issue the Treasury dollar bills. And so once again, this question comes up is like, how? How do we just create money out of thin air? How do we issue money without debt? Doesn't there have to be a liability? Like if you borrow money from the bank, don't you have to pay it back? And how do the bank, if you're buying a house, does the bank necessarily have that $250,000 sitting in the bank that then they use to pay for the house? No, they create it out of thin air. And then also put a liability on their books that you have for you to pay back, plus interest. But consider a thought experiment, right? What if the United States Treasury printed $1,300 bills? That's the amount of the monthly amount of the UBI. What if they printed $1,300 bills and mailed them out to everyone? Creating an asset without a corresponding liability. You might have heard discussions about ways to avoid a default when Congress is getting into their brinksmanship games over the debt ceiling, and this idea of a platinum coin that the mint could make a platinum coin that was worth $1 trillion, and then you could take that coin down to the Federal Reserve and deposit $1 trillion into our account. Money is made up, right? Again, when Andrew Jackson paid off the debt in 1835, there wasn't like some guy sitting around with $31 trillion who's like, oh, man, I sure hope the United States starts borrowing money that I can loan it to them. The money is made up, and the policy choice that has been made is to make up the money as debt. We don't have to, that we can change that policy so that the American people reap the benefits of the growth of the economy instead of the bankers. So let's take a look at Section 434. This is the part where we actually issue and create the Treasury dollar bills. This Section 3104 of Title 31, this is the part of the U.S. Code that deals with Treasury dollar bills, or T-bills, as they're sometimes called. And T-bills, by definition, are short-term notes sold at less than face value, and then within a few weeks or months, they can be redeemed at face value. Now, they're only available in digital form. You cannot get these in paper form. They're only digital, and they're only issued when there is a buyer. Now, Treasury dollar bills are different, and paragraph 1 spells out the ways. Every Treasury dollar bill shall be recorded on issuance as an asset among the digital Treasury accounts authorized by paragraphs B1 or B2. So anytime that one of these is created, it's going into a recipient's account. from the American Union Jobs Program, a B1 or B2 account. Treasury dollar bills shall yield no interest, shall never expire, shall be valued at precisely one Federal Reserve note, shall be issued as digital dollars, and shall serve as the unit of account for digital treasury accounts. So this is what treasury dollar bills are. They don't pay interest, they don't expire, they're just digital dollars worth one Federal Reserve note. Paragraph 2 clarifies a few other things, that they shall be legal tender in payment for all debts, public and private, within the United States. We saw the reference change in the previous section. Shall be receivable in payment for all taxes, internal duties, excises, debts, and demands of every kind due in the United States. Yes, they're legal tender. You can use them to pay anything. They can be fractional amounts. Don't have to be whole dollars. And they shall be exchanged for digital or physical Federal Reserve notes upon demand. So again, if you have your digital treasury dollars, you want to exchange them for Federal Reserve notes, you can. We will make those exchanges, and changing them back depends on whether or not there are unencumbered digital treasury dollar bills in that account in the treasury, where they can be issued back. And in the long term, this won't be a problem, but in the short term, again, the only way that these can be created is if they're going into citizens' accounts. And so think about this for a second, right? Is the first issuance of these payments, and Elon Musk is like, oh man, this is an easier way for me to move money around. I want $100 billion worth of treasury dollar bills so then I can move it around. Well, they won't exist. You can't collect. The only way that those treasury dollar bills exist is when they're issued to all citizens. They're not just going to be created randomly. So there's very tight controls over how they can be created. So over time, this number will build up as they circulate more and more in the economy. The number of Federal Reserve notes will go down along with the national debt. But to start, they are they'll be sort of in limited supply. All right, so let's look at how we keep them in limited supply, and that is in paragraph 3. Treasury dollar bills may not be issued for any purpose except as authorized by this paragraph. One is voluntary value sharing. I'm going to talk about that later this week, Wednesday, I think. This is sort of like a year-end bonus, a Christmas bonus, if you will, that would go to all citizens as a result of the voluntary value sharing. So we'll talk about that more later. But the main one is the American Union Jobs Program. Everyone gets an American Union job. The treasurer shall make regular issuances into the B1 and B2 accounts of recipients pursuant to the schedule and amounts provided by the Social Security Administration in the American Union Jobs Program. Or the other way that they can be issued as missed payments. If somebody who is eligible for one of these accounts didn't have it opened at the launch date, then they are eligible for the whatever missed payments. So that is those are the only ways that treasury dollar bills can be created. Yeah, that's it. The only way that they can be created is by being issued to American citizens. Now, Congress makes the laws, and so Congress can change the laws. And so subsections B and C are the lockbox that we put this in. If you remember, we had that language from the truce on guns and abortion to restrict what Congress could do. And so section B says, notwithstanding any other provision in law, it shall not be in order for House or Senate to consider any bill that would require the Treasury to issue treasury dollar bills for any purpose other than those permitted by paragraph A3, or which again is the things we just covered, or would otherwise be inconsistent with the principles or purposes of the subtitle. So Congress can't consider anything that would issue treasury dollar bills for anything else. And then that's our basic lockbox. And then we put another lock on top of it, notwithstanding any other provision of law, no bill or joint resolution, amendment or sentiments or anything that would amend this section or the provisions of 3104D as inserted by this bill may not be considered unless it's determined by 2/3 of the members of the House voting by roll call, a quorum being present. So if Congress wants to try and amend this section to remove that lock, first they've got to remove the lock on top of that. So between those two kind of things, first they have to signal their intention with the 2/3 roll call vote, and then they can, before even trying to amend that section of the law, before even considering amending it. So that is the lockbox. I kind of like to think of it as, maybe you've heard this financial advice, where you take your credit cards and you freeze them in a block of ice so you can't easily use them. And so America's credit cards are held by Congress. The Constitution is very clear on that. But when it comes to the treasury dollar bills, we can freeze that in a block of ice, so it'll take a sincere effort to use them for reckless spending. Now, this doesn't do anything at all to restrict Congress from borrowing money. They can still borrow money through the Federal Reserve as much as they need. But what they can't do is take this shortcut. Any treasury dollar bills that they want to create have to go to all the citizens. That's the only way you can create them. And then this section, the effective date of the actual issuing of these is 12:01 a.m. on that launch date that the Secretary of the Treasury determines. But the locking language, that snaps into place on passage of the blueprint. So again, this doesn't end the Federal Reserve, but what it does is it creates a new mechanism for adding money into the economy other than what the Federal Reserve does of borrowing it into existence. So if you imagine the economy is this boat on a river, and it's powered by the growth of the economy. Well, the Federal Reserve's tools are like a set of oars that they can steer, try and steer the economy and move it as needed. But the treasury dollar bills as UBIs would be like a small, steady motor. So you're going to keep issuing the same amount as UBI every year, growing along with the economy. And the Federal Reserve could still paddle. They could paddle forward, they could paddle backwards, they could steer, or they could just relax. That this regular growth would be fine to manage the economy. Milton Friedman suggested that this is how the money supply should be governed, that it just would grow by, if I remember correctly, 3 to 5% each year. That was his plan. So rather than doing what we're doing now, like what we're doing right now with the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, is to try and get people to borrow less, to spend less, and with the idea that then if they're spending less, then companies won't expand, companies will shut down or go out of business, people will be thrown out of work, they will have less money to spend, and since the same amount of stuff will be out there, but less people will be buying it, that will decrease inflation. But the better model is to increase production. So you remember what we did, so increase the production so that people can buy the things that we want to buy. Now that doesn't address the problems of corporate greed and the corporations that are making record profits right now because they're jacking up their prices because they can get away with it, because people are expecting prices to go up because of inflation. Their greed is driving a large percentage of inflation right now, along with supply chain disruptions and the war in Ukraine disrupting things over there. But these are all factors in inflation. So let's grow the economy to keep up with the growth in the money supply, and that will stabilize the purchasing power. All right. Section 435 is authorizing the post office to offer basic banking services. Fun fact, about 93% of the world's post offices offer basic banking service. The United States is the only major exception. And we used to. It was proposed back in 1871, but the bankers made the usual exceptions, like, oh, it's socialism. So according to a 2014 article in Slate, there were almost 100 bills that were proposed and defeated over the next 40 years trying to pass postal banking. And finally, it became law in 1911, and it was a huge success. People deposited $32 million in the first 2 years. People trusted the post office in a way they did not trust banks. And so money that they had been keeping under their mattresses or in their stockings or whatever else, they came and deposited into the post office. And that worked great for a number of decades until, as part of the New Deal, we got FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And then banks were less risky. Before that, if your bank ran into financial trouble as an account holder, you were just out of luck. You just lost all your money. It's too bad, so sad. And so, again, the post office was a much more appealing alternative. People trusted the post offices the way they didn't trust banks. But once you had banking insurance, deposit insurance, then it was less risky, right? If your bank went belly up, the FDIC guaranteed that you could still get your money. So people started moving their money towards banks, and Congress had also capped the interest rate on these postal accounts, so made them less competitive as well. And so then postal banking kind of became less relevant in the 1960s. They decided to shut it down because the banks are like, look, we're awesome, we're trustworthy, we're everywhere. We don't need postal banking anymore. People can come put their money in with us. Well, we could use more competition in the banking system to help keep them honest. And the post office is a very trusted institution in the United States. And so Section 435 is going to restore that. It's going to add postal banking to the list of duties for the United States. Let me go through this real quick. All right. So post offices will be able to provide basic financial services like low-cost, small-dollar loans. So we make payday loans kind of unnecessary, create a cheaper, better alternative, which in addition with UBI should put a lot of them out of business. Can allow interest-bearing savings accounts, transactional services like debit cards, remittance services, so paying, sending and receiving money, pass-through accounts, which we'll talk about in a minute, and other basic financial services that are appropriate. All right, this does not make the post office into a bank. This is just offering banking services. So, yeah, so these are permissible non-banking activities, and that this money raised from offering banking services should be pooled separately and not intercommingled with other revenues. All right, we can get right into Section 436, This is the authority and mandate for Federal Reserve banks to maintain digital treasury accounts. They will be required to have these treasury accounts. And we talked about in B3 that Federal Reserve banks would have a master account for member banks. They have to comply with all the basic record keeping stuff in those banks. And so they would be required to do that. All right, now we're getting into pass-through accounts. What do they, now that we've got that framework in place, member banks may open and maintain pass-through accounts for any person. And so basically a pass-through account would be like a direct deposit. So if you like your bank, you can keep it. You don't have to use the treasury, your free treasury account. You can go to your for-profit bank and have a pass-through account, which essentially is like direct deposit. So your $1,300 comes into your U.S. Treasury account, and then your bank would pull it through, turn it into Federal Reserve notes, and you can spend it however you want, just like you do now. Just be a $1,300 monthly deposit. Yeah, so the terms of these pass-through accounts, again, they will be denominated in Federal Reserve notes, not in Treasury dollar bills. They'll be branded as pass-through U.S. Treasury accounts, same providing reasonable protections against loss and security. As I said, when you pull through, pass through Treasury dollar bills into these accounts, they'll be exchanged for Federal Reserve notes, but there is no prohibition on switching them back. Nothing in this section shall be construed to prohibit a member bank from exchanging Federal Reserve notes for unencumbered assets of subparagraph A2A. Those are the, this is the separate legal entity that holds all of the Treasury dollar bills that are not exchanged with the U.S. Treasury. So your bank will exchange many of your Treasury dollar bills for Federal Reserve notes with the U.S. Treasury, but it's also going to hold on to some to offer you as a customer the opportunity to change money back into Treasury dollar bills. Provided that no fee may be charged for such service for exchanging these things. And the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System shall develop regulations and obligations in relation to these pass-through accounts. Now, non-member banks. Non-member banks means state non-member banks. As a bank, you can be chartered, have a national charter, or you can have a state charter. And while most banks have the national charter, there are also many state banks. And so state banks would be included as non-member banks. The Postal Service would be considered a non-member bank, and credit unions. And so there's a little less paperwork and requirement for banks that aren't members of the Federal Reserve system. They have still the same pass-through accounts that will be in Federal Reserve notes, but they can maintain their own reserves of Treasury dollar bills however they see fit. And once again, they can do reverse transfers, provided that no fee is charged on them. They don't have to keep their digital dollars for the Federal Reserve Bank. Salty Omarova was the Joe Biden's nominee for the I'm spacing on it. I don't remember if it was Secretary of Treasury. But last year, she wrote an article called The People's Ledger. And based on Senator Brown's legislation, which again this is partly based on, that these community banking institutions could offer more privacy protections. So for people who want to avoid the Federal Reserve System, this would be one of the ways that they could do it, is by investing and saving their money in these community banking banks. All right, and then the last section, 439, is just regulations. Secretary and Board of Governors for the Federal Reserve System shall promulgate regulations carrying out this subtitle. All right. Looks like we're just about at time here. And this is the way that, again, this is how we can upgrade our banking system. We are due to do it. We did it after the Revolution and after the Constitution with Alexander Hamilton. We did it with Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. We upgraded again. We did it with Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. And now, once again, it's time to upgrade the banking system. And we can do it in a way that benefits the people. We can do it in a way that serves all Americans' interest. We can create a trickle-up economy by issuing money to all Americans as universal basic income. We'll talk more about that in a couple of days. And one last quick update. Fast for Peace on October 15th, as part of the general strike. I'm observing a 21-day fast. Today is the 16th day of my fast. I'm still feeling good, and my weight's down to 179 pounds. But I'm still feeling good and still going. And if you want to address America's problems, if you want to de-escalate the 2022 midterms, if you want to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, join in for the last 24 hours, dinner to dinner from October 14th to 15th, and use the hashtag Fast for Peace on Twitter. Together, we can change the national conversation. We can solve problems. We can build a better America. That's what the blueprint does. All right. Have a good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.